Thanks for tuning in to Operation Revenge. Make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now let's begin the story.
The first thing I noticed when I walked into that cramped little courtroom was how spotless my family looked. My mother's pearl necklace caught the fluorescent light, my father's tie was perfectly knotted, and my brother Greg's suit looked like it had just come from the tailor. Meanwhile, I was in my Wildfire Command uniform, scuffed boots, smoke-stained jacket, and hair tied back in a hasty braid. I could practically feel their judgment radiating across the room. "Valerie Hartman," the bailiff called, and I stepped forward, my back straight, even though my stomach was churning. I'm 41 years old, a wildfire incident commander with over 2 decades on the line. I've stood in front of walls of flame that could swallow a town in minutes, but facing my own family in court? That was a different kind of fire. Their lawyer, a thin man with slicked back hair and a rehearsed smile, started painting me as some sort of reckless loner who had abandoned family duties to chase adrenaline in the flames. He said I didn't deserve my grandfather's forest lodge or the surrounding acres he left behind. According to them, I was too unstable, too disconnected from family values. "She chose fires over family," their lawyer sneered, pacing slowly, as if he were delivering gospel truth. "She hasn't spent a holiday with them in years, hasn't even called regularly. This lodge belongs to the family, not to a woman who treats it like a trophy." I stayed silent. Every instinct screamed to stand up and shout back, but I knew better. My mother sat there, her lips pursed like she was trying not to smirk. Greg avoided my eyes entirely. When the judge, an older man with silver hair and weathered hands, asked if I had anything to submit, I pulled out one single item, a weathered yellowed letter from my grandfather Henry. His handwriting, still firm despite his age, filled both sides of the page. I didn't say a word. I just handed it to the judge. The judge adjusted his glasses and read silently for a moment. Something softened in his expression. He looked up at me and said, "I knew Henry Hartman. He was a man of the land, and I see he left a piece of his heart here." Then, something unexpected happened. The double doors at the back of the courtroom creaked open, and in marched a line of firefighters, my crew, soot-stained faces, boots clattering on the floor, and helmets tucked under their arms. Chief Nora Bennett, my retired mentor, stood at the front. Without a word, they raised their hands in a salute. The room fell dead silent. Even my father's smirk faltered. The judge stood, saluting me as well. No fiery speech was needed. That moment said everything. I wasn't some reckless drifter. I had earned every scar, every acre, every ounce of respect. I saw Greg shift uncomfortably in his seat. My mother looked down at her lap. Their lawyer cleared his throat, but no words came. The air in that courtroom had changed, and everyone knew it. I used to think something was wrong with me because love in our house was always conditional. My father, Frank Hartman, worked at the sawmill his whole life. He came home smelling of pine sap and sweat, sitting at the kitchen table like a king who expected quiet. If you weren't silent, you'd get that look, the one that made you wish you were invisible. He didn't talk about feelings, he just muttered about hard work and how dreams don't pay the bills. My mother, Elaine, was different, but not in a good way. She'd wanted to be a singer once. She had an old photograph of herself at some county fair, standing by a microphone with a hopeful smile. That smile never made it into our kitchen. By the time I was old enough to notice, she'd traded her dreams for bitterness, and she never let me forget it. "You think running into fires is some noble calling?" I once overheard her tell my father when she thought I was asleep. "She's just trying to get attention. That's not work for a woman." I was 15 then, standing in the hallway, my fists clenched at my sides. I remember thinking, if that's what she believes, then I have to prove her wrong. The only person who ever believed in me was my grandfather, Henry Hartman. He'd been a forest warden for decades before retiring to his cabin in the mountains. Henry never looked at me like I was too fragile or too foolish. He saw something in me that nobody else did. "You've got fire in your heart, kid," he used to say, his voice rough but kind. "Don't let small minds tell you how far you can climb." I can still picture the day that changed everything. We were on the porch of his cabin, the smell of cedar hanging in the air. He sat in his rocking chair, sipping black coffee from a tin cup. I was next to him on the steps, hugging my knees and trying to imagine a life beyond that small town. He pointed out toward the hills, where the tree line met the sky. "The world out there is bigger than their doubts," he told me. "Don't waste your life trying to make them proud. Be someone you're proud of." Those words stuck with me like they were carved into my bones. They gave me the courage to leave home, to chase the wildfires instead of running from them, to make a life that had nothing to do with their approval. Back then, I swore I'd never let my parents' scorn define me, and I never did. I hadn't been back to Pine Ridge in 15 years, not since I left with a duffel bag and Henry's quiet blessing. Driving into town that morning, everything looked smaller, like the mountains had grown taller while the people shrank. I pulled up to the church in my Wildfire Command uniform, boots polished, jacket lined with ribbons from years of service. I thought maybe it would show respect. Instead, it made me stand out like a stranger at my own family's gathering. My parents were already on the church steps, Greg beside them in a charcoal suit. My mother's eyes ran over me, sharp and cold. "Well," she said, as if my arrival was an inconvenience, "you decided to show up?" Greg smirked, his arms crossed. "Fancy outfit. Guess you want everyone to know you're the hero." "I came to honor Grandpa," I said quietly, but it didn't matter. My father looked right through me, as if I was someone else's kid. When I stepped inside, the whispers started. I caught pieces of it. She didn't even visit when he was sick, and too busy chasing fires. I kept my head high, but each word stung like embers against skin. I searched for a seat, but every pew near the front was filled with cousins and neighbors who wouldn't meet my eyes. In the end, I stood at the back, hands clasped behind me, listening as they told stories about Henry, stories that left out my name entirely. It was like I never existed in his life, like I hadn't spent half my childhood on that cabin porch with him. When the service ended, I waited until the crowd thinned. The casket was at the front, draped in simple wildflowers and pine branches, just like Henry would have wanted. I stepped closer, ignoring the sideways glances from my mother and Greg. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice catching. "For everything. I wouldn't be who I am if it weren't for you." My gloved hand brushed the edge of the wooden casket, and for a moment, I felt like that stubborn little girl again, sitting on his porch and believing I could climb any mountain. Behind me, a pair of relatives spoke in hushed tones, thinking I couldn't hear. The cabin, the land, even the savings. They're all going to Elaine and Frank. That girl doesn't get a thing. I didn't react. Not there. I walked out without looking at my family, the late afternoon air cutting through me like cold steel. That night, in the empty motel room off Highway 7, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Henry wasn't the kind of man to let the people who ignored him take everything he built. My instincts, honed from years of reading fire lines and smoke patterns, told me this was no accident. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the ceiling. If there was a fight ahead, I'd face it. Just like every fire I ever walked into, I'd find the truth one step at a time. The motel room smelled like stale coffee and damp carpet, but I barely noticed. My laptop glowed on the chipped desk, surrounded by a mess of notes, old photos, and Henry's letters that I dug out of the box I carried everywhere. I worked through the night, the way I would during a long fire watch, focused and methodical. The county clerk's office had digitized most property records, so I started there. It didn't take long to find a scanned copy of Henry's updated will. The date was less than 6 months old, written when Henry's health was declining. That alone set my teeth on edge. Henry hated paperwork and rarely trusted lawyers, but what stopped me cold was the signature. It was too neat, too careful, nothing like the bold, jagged scrawl on the birthday cards and notes he'd sent me over the years. I dug out one of his old letters and laid it beside the printed will. The difference was undeniable. I zoomed in on the document and studied every loop and slant. Whoever signed this didn't know Henry's habits, how his H always leaned forward like it was pushing into the wind, how he made his T with one quick slash. The forger had tried to make it pretty. Henry's handwriting was never pretty. Once I saw that, everything else clicked into place. Greg's flashy new truck, my parents' sudden kitchen renovation, their talk of investments. None of them had ever had that kind of money. I knew Greg had tanked at least 2 small businesses over the last decade, borrowing from anyone foolish enough to believe his promises. The debts must have been crushing. By mid-morning, I had pulled his business filings from the state website. 2 LLCs, both dissolved after lawsuits for unpaid vendors. A third was still active but hanging by a thread. No revenue, just debt. I could almost see the panic that must have driven them to fake a will and grab whatever Henry left behind. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the stack of evidence I was building. Copies of the will, side-by-side comparisons of signatures, Greg's business records, and Henry's handwritten notes. My pulse steadied the way it always did before stepping into a dangerous fire line. This wasn't just about money, it was about Henry's trust, about his legacy being stolen by people who never understood him. I swore I'd build a case so airtight they couldn't wriggle out of it. Quietly, without tipping my hand, I'd prepare like I was planning a containment line around a blaze, steady, deliberate, and ready for the moment to strike. Chief Nora Bennett's office hadn't changed much since she retired 5 years ago. It was tucked behind the old firehouse, walls lined with framed photos of fire crews standing in front of scorched mountains and blackened forests. The smell of leather and ash lingered, like the place still carried the heartbeat of past battles. When I stepped inside, she looked up from her desk, her gray hair pulled into a tight ponytail. "Valerie Hartman," she said with a slow grin. "Haven't seen you in a while. Thought you were out there making the rest of us look bad." I tried to smile, but it didn't stick. "I need your help," I said, taking a seat across from her, and not the firefighting kind. Her eyes narrowed. "Talk to me." I told her everything. The funeral, the way my parents and Greg froze me out, the suspicious will, and the forged signature that mocked everything Henry stood for. I slid a copy of the will across the desk, alongside Henry's old letter to me, the one where he'd written, "This land is yours because you understand it." By the time I finished, my throat was tight, but Nora didn't interrupt once. She studied the papers, her sharp gaze moving between the documents. "Your gut is right. This is a forgery. I've seen you read fire lines. You can read people just as well. They're cornered, and this is their way out." "I want to fight them," I said, "but I don't want to let anger cloud me. I don't want to screw this up." Nora leaned back, arms crossed. "This isn't about anger. It's about evidence. Treat it like a fire line. You wouldn't charge in blind, would you? No, you'd map the terrain, find the wind shifts, know every weak spot before making a move." Her words grounded me, the way they always had when I was a rookie trying to prove myself. "So, where do I start?" "With a plan," she said. She pulled out a notepad and began sketching a timeline. "We gather everything, property records, old letters, anyone who can vouch for Henry's intentions. I know a lawyer who's tough as steel and owes me a favor. We'll get them to look over this." For the first time in weeks, I felt like I wasn't standing alone in the flames. The courthouse felt colder the second time around. My parents and Greg were seated together, all smug smiles and polished shoes, like they'd already won. Greg leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, whispering something to my mother that made her smirk. Their lawyer glanced at me as if I were already beaten. I walked in with Chief Nora Bennett at my side. She wasn't in uniform, but her presence carried more authority than any badge. Behind her sat our attorney, a woman with steel gray hair and a voice sharp enough to cut through lies. I clutched Henry's original will in my briefcase, along with a stack of evidence I'd spent weeks piecing together. When the judge, a retired park ranger named William Carter, took the bench, the room fell silent. His weathered face gave nothing away. The other side's lawyer rose first, diving into the same tired narrative. I was unstable, always away chasing fires, unfit to manage land or property. He painted me as a woman who chose danger over family, someone undeserving of Henry's legacy. "Miss Hartman," the lawyer sneered, "is it true you haven't lived in Pine Ridge for over 15 years? That you rarely called or visited your family?" I met his gaze and answered calmly, "I chose a career where I protect forests and lives. That doesn't mean I loved my grandfather any less." When it was our turn, my attorney stood and methodically presented everything. She began with the forged will, laying out the comparison of signatures. Henry's true scrawl against the clean, fake one they submitted. "This is not Henry Hartman's signature," she said firmly, pointing to the evidence. "Miss Hartman has birthday notes, letters, and legal documents proving the difference." The room shifted as she moved to financial records. Gregory Hartman's failed businesses left him with significant debt. Weeks after Henry's death, both he and his parents made sudden purchases, a truck, a kitchen remodel, paid in full. The motive for this forgery could not be clearer. Then I produced the final piece. Henry's weathered letter, addressed to me. I placed it in the judge's hands. His eyes lingered on the handwriting, and something in his expression softened. Chief Bennett stood without being asked. "Your Honor," she said, her voice carrying across the courtroom, "Valerie Hartman has spent her life in service to this land. I trust her with my life, and so did Henry Hartman." The judge nodded slowly, then stood. "Would all firefighters present please rise?" In the back of the room, A line of men and women, my crew, rose to their feet and saluted. Their boots echoed like a heartbeat through the courtroom. No one on my family's side moved. Greg stared at his shoes. This court, Judge Carter said, his voice firm, recognizes Valerie Hartman as the rightful heir to Henry Hartman's estate. The evidence of forgery will be referred to criminal review. The gavel struck. My family's faces went pale. For the first time, I felt the weight lifting off my chest. The headlines hit faster than I expected. Local family under investigation for forged will. Photos of my parents and Greg outside the courthouse filled the evening news. Greg looked furious in every shot, his jaw tight and eyes downcast. My mother's face was pale, her hand gripping my father's arm like she might fall over. Watching it all unfold, I didn't feel triumph, just a hollow ache. I spent the first few days after the verdict at the cabin. The place was exactly how Henry left it. Dust on the windowsills, the faint smell of cedar in the walls, and stacks of his old journals on the shelf. Instead of celebrating, I rolled up my sleeves and started working. I replaced rotten porch boards, cleaned the chimney, and sanded down the old rocking chair, where Henry had once told me, "This place is yours to protect, Val." Every swing of the hammer felt like stitching something back together inside me. Word spread around town about my family's fraud. Neighbors who once gave me wary looks now stopped by to offer quiet support. I appreciated it, but I didn't let myself dwell on the gossip. I'd spent too many years burning up energy on people who never gave me the same in return. About 2 weeks after the verdict, my mother showed up. She looked smaller than I remembered, her once stiff posture now bent, her clothes loose. "Valerie," she said softly, standing on the porch like she wasn't sure she was welcome. I didn't answer. "I came to say I'm sorry," she said. Her voice cracked. "We were wrong. I was wrong. I should have been proud of you, but I couldn't see past my own failures." Her words might have meant something years ago, but now they just felt like smoke. Too late. Too thin. I nodded but said nothing. When she finally turned to leave, I watched her walk down the gravel path, her steps slow and unsteady. I didn't call her back. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let this land or Henry's memory be about bitterness. I set up the paperwork for the Hartman Forestry Scholarship, funded by Henry's estate and my own savings. It would help children of firefighters go to college or start careers in land management, the way Henry would have wanted. Every day, I split my time between restoring the cabin and working with the scholarship committee. It gave me purpose, something beyond family grudges and old scars. I didn't need their approval anymore. I had Henry's memory and the land he loved, and that was enough. The letter arrived in late autumn, tucked in a plain envelope with my mother's shaky handwriting on the front. I almost didn't open it. Part of me expected more blame, another round of bitter words. Instead, her voice spilled out across the page, fragile and unguarded. "Valerie, I don't know how much time I have left. I want you to know the truth before it's too late. I was jealous of you, jealous of your courage, your freedom, the way Henry believed in you. I crushed your dreams because I couldn't face my own failures. I'm sorry I called you reckless. I'm sorry I made you feel unwanted. I wish I could take it back. I read it 3 times, my hands trembling." She had never admitted fault before, not once in my entire life. I felt something shift inside me, but it wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Still, I sat at the cabin's old kitchen table and wrote back. "Mom, I don't know if I can forget everything, but I can stop carrying the hate. I hope you find peace. I'll take care of Henry's land the way he would have wanted." I kept it simple, just enough to close the loop without reopening every wound. A week later, Greg called and said she was gone. His voice was flat, almost mechanical. "The funeral's next Saturday," he muttered. "You can come if you want." I did go, but not in uniform. I wore plain jeans and a black sweater, slipping into the back pew like a stranger. The service was small, quieter than Henry's, and I didn't speak to anyone. When they lowered her casket, I felt no triumph or revenge, just a hollow ache that reminded me how complicated love and family can be. Afterward, I returned to the cabin and threw myself into the Hartman Forestry Scholarship. Applications were already coming in from kids who wanted to become rangers, wildfire specialists, or conservationists. Each essay reminded me of why I'd started this, so someone else could feel supported the way Henry once supported me. When a local high school invited me to speak at a career day, I hesitated at first. I wasn't used to telling my story. But standing there, looking out at those eager faces, I realized strength isn't about winning battles. It's about standing tall even when you've been burned. The mountains were quiet the day I visited Henry's grave, a white wildflower in my hand. It had been years since the courtroom, years since I'd spoken to anyone from my family. The cabin was mine now, fully restored, its porch painted the same shade Henry loved. Yet standing there, I felt like the same little girl who used to sit on his lap and listen to him talk about the forest like it was alive. I knelt by the gravestone, brushing pine needles away from his name. "I did it, Grandpa," I whispered. "I kept the land safe. I kept your promise alive." For a moment, my throat tightened, but I let the tears come. They weren't heavy tears of grief anymore, but lighter ones, grateful, cleansing. The Hartman Forestry Scholarship had grown far beyond what I imagined. What started as a small fund for local kids was now a statewide program. We'd already sent dozens of students to college, kids who wrote me letters saying they wanted to become rangers, firefighters, or conservation scientists. Every time I read their words, I felt Henry's presence, like he was still out there patrolling the tree line. I'd learned something through all of this. Justice isn't about revenge. It's not about proving anyone wrong or holding on to old wounds. It's about creating something better from the ashes. My parents and Greg had vanished from public view after the investigation, their reputations shattered. I didn't celebrate their downfall. I simply moved on, because carrying bitterness would have burned me alive. As I stood, I placed the wildflower against Henry's headstone. "You taught me to stand tall," I said quietly, "even when the fire's at your back." I turned and looked down the path toward the cabin, the late afternoon light catching the trees in gold. For the first time, I felt truly free. Not because I had won a battle, but because I had chosen not to keep fighting a war that no longer mattered. I'd built a life Henry would be proud of, one rooted in resilience and service. I walked away from the grave with a lighter step, the forest breeze carrying the scent of pine and earth. The past would always be part of me, but it no longer defined me. Whatever came next, more fires, more rebuilding, more lives to touch, I was ready. Henry's legacy was safe, and so was mine.